I think I want to start off by just reminding everyone of why I think there's a particularly good opportunity now to build a lot of things, right? And the first part of my answer here is basically that the underlying technology has improved massively over the last 3 years, right? So a few years ago, I remember on my first visit to Argentina, I think the amount of crypto, like just public attention on crypto was probably even higher than it was today, right? This was the time when you saw advertisements in the streets, when you saw advertisements in the airports, you would see like just about everyone talking about crypto and trying to use it everywhere. But 3 years ago, one of the big challenges was, well, there was a lot of things the technology was not ready for, right? And so there were a lot of crypto users, but not a lot of blockchain users, right? Instead, like to use crypto and to use it with a good user experience and low enough fees, the only way was a Binance account. Now, since then, I think there's been a huge growth in the amount of people building here, also elsewhere around the world, in the number of people actually using applications on chain. And the biggest reason why, I think, is that the biggest user experience problems that we've had have basically gone away, right? So one big user experience problem was fees. In 2021, to send a transaction on chain, transaction fee was about $2. And so to pay for a coffee here, well, coffee would cost less than $2, so a transaction fee would cost more than the coffee, right? Second reason is the amount of time that you'd have to wait after you send a transaction. It was high, and it was also very volatile, right? So you would send a transaction, sometimes it would get in 30 seconds, sometimes you wait 5 minutes, sometimes you wait 30 minutes. Now, Ethereum already improved upon Bitcoin by having a shorter block time, but it's still not good enough, right? And since 2021, on both of these issues, we have seen just massive improvements, right? So on transaction fees, we have seen the growth of layer 2s, and this year, because of EIP 4844, which introduced blobs, layer 2s have seen their fees drop to now regularly under 1 cent per transaction. And so applications that were basically impossible before are now just completely viable, and people can go build them, and you can go and use them. Now, this also actually means that blockchains even become useful for non-financial applications, right? If you imagine building a non-financial applications, right? Think of it as the internet, where every time you click a button, you have to pay 25 cents. Now, if the internet worked this way, almost all applications would not work, right? Nobody would use Twitter, nobody would use Facebook. Maybe the rich people would use Twitter, but even the rich people, they would not use Twitter because there would not be enough people to interact with them and make them feel important, right? So, like, basically nothing that would really work, right? And but then if you reduce that fee from 25 cents down to basically zero, lots of things that were just completely not viable just become possible, right? And so if you're just building a financial application, transaction fees that are higher, in a lot of cases you can pay them. Non-financial applications, like, you really need to get the fees down. And this is what we have actually succeeded at doing. Now, transaction times, right? So the user experience where you have to send a transaction and then you have to go and get a coffee because you don't know when the transaction will be accepted, this is not a good user experience. This was Ethereum's user experience 3 years ago. Since then, we've had EIP 1559, which reforms the fee market, and one of the results of it is that transactions reliably get included within 1 or 2 blocks. Also, we've had the merge, and the merge actually, as one of its consequences, even though it did not change the block time, it actually reduced the average amount of time you have to wait until the next block from 12 seconds to 6 seconds. And this is like one of those interesting results of probability theory. So if anyone here is interested in math, it's a fun puzzle to figure out why. But this also happened, right? And then after this, we've had fast confirmations on layer 2s, thanks to pre-confs. And so on many layer 2s, you only wait 1 second for a transaction to get confirmed. So we've gone from transactions taking a long time to confirm all the way down to transactions being like faster than most credit card infrastructure. So huge amount of progress on both costs and on fees. Also, the other part of the reason why I think is like the social reasons, right? So Argentina has a unique combination where there is a very strong local developer community, right? There's been many projects that have had parts of their team or the whole team in Argentina. You know, people from Open Zeppelin, people from MakerDAO, Proof of Humanity, all kinds of different projects for a long time. Kleros, you know, the list is very long, right? And also a very high user adoption, right? There's huge numbers of people here that have tried and used crypto, and to them, crypto is at least some level of familiarity already. And so these are things that have been here for a long time, right? I think the new variable this year is, of course, that instead of the government being a problem, the government there's actual top-down support from the government, or at least a lot of interest in being supportive to this community, right? And so it's this interesting combination of factors that I think you really don't see in most other places, right? So what kinds of applications do I think make sense, right? So I see a few different categories. So one of these categories is just continuing to make basic payments and savings work better. So this is a wallet called Dymo. Its goal is to try to have user experience that is as good as Venmo and make that work with crypto. So it's built on USDC and on Base. And like basically just build a wallet that is intended for regular people to be able to use to pay each other. If someone doesn't want to deal with Ethereum addresses, they don't have to. They can pay to a phone number just like you can with or like Web2 payment applications. So payments continue to be an important app, and payments continue to be important for people saving money. They continue to be important for business, continue to be very important for international transactions, right? I think it's important to remember that even if the best possible outcome for Milei happens here, and if everything that you think is wrong with the Argentinian economy finance regulation disappears, there's still the problem of transacting between Argentina and Chile, Argentina and Venezuela, Argentina and the United States. So international trade in general it continues to be hard, and around basically everywhere around the world except for between like rich countries that have very good connections to each other, right? So continuing to make payments easier to the point where it's a practical option for people. Part of it is user experience, part of it is also on-ramps and off-ramps, right? Often on-ramps and off-ramps are actually the limiting factor to things like this actually being useful for people to like actually make a core part of their business. So application category 2, right, which is more complicated financial tools. So these are ideas that I've already heard from developers here, right? So bonds, real estate fractionalization, corporate shares, any kind of asset other than like Argentinian pesos or dollars or euros or cryptocurrencies, any kind of like other real economy asset, you can put it on chain, tokenize it, and potentially open up a lot of possibilities for people to do things with it that they were not able to do before, right? And bonds, obviously, they already exist, but we can make them more accessible. Corporate shares already exist, but you can explore putting corporate records on the blockchain, and then actually making it possible for people to trade shares on chain. And real estate fractionalization, this is something that doesn't really exist as an asset class now. I mean, there are real estate investment trusts, and you can get some shares, but relatively a very underdeveloped sector. And so I think this is also something that's really worth exploring and looking into. So a lot of opportunities to create DeFi platforms that are not just trading between things that are inside of crypto, but that are actually trading between assets that are connected to the real economy here and potentially around the world. So we could also get into some more of these kind of more advanced science fiction categories. So this is what I call info finance, right? So I wrote a blog post on this about a month ago, and this year, one of the application types that we've seen make a lot of impact is prediction markets. And the reason why I talk about them is that like they've actually gotten a huge amount of attention from people outside of crypto, right? There are even intellectuals who normally hate crypto and think crypto is a scam. Even they are retweeting screenshots of Polymarket, right? And so like this is what mass adoption looks like, right? And the way that I view prediction markets is I view them as a gambling site for the bettors, but a news site for people who are reading, right? So if you are not betting on these markets, what you can do is you can go and you can look at what the prices are, and this gives you valuable information, right? And it gives you and so this actually helps solve another really important problem, which is how do we create better tools to help identify what is true and what is not true on the internet, and do that in a way that does not depend on some pre-selected group that already knows what all the truths are and what all the lies are. So it's a very powerful tool, and I mean, I've noticed like myself starting to use it in my information gathering workflow. A lot of others have as well, and like I see the stuff that exists right now as being just one example of a much larger category, right? And prediction markets are one example. Decision markets for governance are another example, right? So you can make markets that basically ask people, the market, the question, if you make one decision, what will happen? If you make another decision, what will happen? And then you use this as information to create decisions. So these are things that you can actually try to put into DAOs, and you can actually try to like use these ideas to resolve problems that we see in existing DAOs, right? So for example, in existing DAOs, one of the big problems is that very few people participate in voting, right? So often you have like 3% of the tokens vote, and so someone can come in with 5% of the tokens and just like take it over and make a vote that does whatever they want. So how might we solve this problem? Well, one way to do it is you have a decision market on each question that basically says, well, if the question did come to a vote, then how would people vote for it? And if that market says most people would vote against, then you automatically increase the threshold, right? So this is just one very simple idea, right? So you use the market to give people an opportunity and an incentive to identify and make available information that the DAO does not have. And then you do that to try to make the rest of the governance mechanism more effective. So there's a lot of different ways to use decision markets and prediction markets in governance. It's a very big space. There are DAOs starting to do this already. So very interesting thing to get into. Public goods funding. So in the Ethereum ecosystem, we've had Gitcoin quadratic funding, we've had Optimism retro funding, very big category. And it's a very valuable category, right? Because the things that that our ecosystem depends on, lots of them are what we call public goods, right? They're projects where once you make them, they are immediately available to everyone. And as a result, they're important, but they're very difficult to monetize. They're very difficult to make money for just by selling them. And so we need some other way of funding these things. And one of the ideas is, well, actually, you can use decision markets and governance also as a way of figuring out which public goods deserve the most funding. So the basic idea here is you have some kind of human governance mechanism that is making a very small number of decisions of which projects deserve funding, and then you create an open market where people can use AIs and generate a much larger list of how much funding theoretically every possible project on GitHub or every public project in the country deserves to get. And then you basically use the human governance mechanism as a signal to identify which of the AI models are correct and to reward the ones that are more correct and give them more weight in the decision making. So a lot of very interesting ideas here. Category 4 is ZK, right? So this is like, I think ZK has become this very important sister technology to blockchains, right? And the reason why it's such a powerful sister technology is that the properties that blockchains provide and the properties that ZK provides are very complementary, right? Blockchains give you openness, censorship resistance, auditability, verifiability at the expense of two very important things. One is privacy, one is scalability. What do zero-knowledge proofs give you? They give you privacy and they give you scalability. So these two technologies, they are very effective together. And we've seen, I think, also very interesting non-financial applications of zero-knowledge proofs. So identity is one important use case. Quark ID here in Buenos Aires, also ZooPass, a zero-knowledge identity system that's being originally used in Zuzulu, also being used in a lot of Ethereum events. Then one really interesting recent experiment was Anoncast, which is an account that was on Farcaster and Twitter. And if you have a sufficient number of Anon coins, then you can use a zero-knowledge proof and you can broadcast from it. And so the idea here is that you have an environment where people can speak freely, but at the same time, like you have some kind of filter, so it doesn't just get overwhelmed by like an unlimited amount of like fake information and bots. And so you create something that's still like interesting for people to pay attention to. Right? Now, what's interesting, I think, about this idea is like there's different ways to make the filter, right? So the beginning Anoncast approach, you have to have 10,000 Anon tokens, and then you can post. This is one approach. Right, you can also think of something that is similar to Anoncast, but that is connected to Quark ID in some way, right? Like that, I think, is already a good hackathon project, right? Make a fork of Anoncast, except instead of Anoncast, it's like Argentinian cast, right? And like every Argentinians can tweet what they want, but nobody knows which Argentinian. Then voting, right? So. Zoopol, we zero-knowledge proof-based voting, and we see a lot of different examples of zero-knowledge proofs being used for voting. I think this is also one of those really powerful primitives where once you make it work well enough, you can start to use it in many different situations. One interesting theme that I think is really interesting for people to think about, and this is one I think that is can only be enabled by the combination of a strong grassroots community and top-down support. And so this is a local micro-democracy, right? So what do I mean by this? We already have reasonably secure macro-democracy, right? We have elections, you can vote every 4 years, every 6 years, different number of years in different countries. You vote, paper ballots, like it's very well understood. And then the other thing that we have is we have insecure micro-democracy, right? You have likes and retweets on social media, but then everyone knows like those can be manipulated very easily. You don't know whether to trust them. So we have these two things. Well, what if you can have secure micro-democracy, right? What if you can come up with democratic mechanisms where regular people are able to provide input on like much smaller scale micro questions, and then that actually directly feeds into government budgeting decisions, potentially government subsidy and tax decisions, like what do you want to see more of, what do you want to see less of, and have that turn into a signal that just becomes directly accessible to entrepreneurs instead of being some complicated bureaucratic process, and also petitions, right? So petitions, I think, are a very good low-risk place to start. Basically, you can have something where anyone can post a message, and then anyone can upvote the message, anonymous vote, and if 10,000 people anonymously upvote a message, you pass a law that the central government is required to make a response. They're not required to do any specific thing, just make a response. Right? And I think this is interesting because it creates this like much lower risk way to really start using the technology, and then we can see where things actually go from there, right? So a lot of the on-chain governance and finance ideas that I talked about, including futarchy and decision markets, including deep funding, like all of these things, I think they potentially have use cases in local government. So this could include like local municipal budgets. This could even include like funding public media, funding local media. I mean, it could funding physical infrastructure. It could include a lot of different things, right? And so I think this is also one category that's really worth looking into, especially like as some of these more advanced technologies also become more useful. So I guess the organizers want people to scan the QR code, so you can scan the QR code. I mean, I think like those are some examples, right, of applications that I think are worth building. Right? I think crypto right now has gotten good enough that it's a technology that can actually give users the level of like quality of experience, the level of low cost, the level of speed that they expect for financial applications, and even to the point where things other than financial applications can also be built as well. And now is a great opportunity to build things that are going to be very useful for people across a number of different industries. And so I highly encourage people to like look at all of these ideas and also look at other ideas, and let's build great things. Thank you.
Okay, if anyone wants to ask something to Vitalik, just take the opportunity because we have like 15 minutes for this. So if you want, I'll leave you the mic. And
Hey, how you doing? So my question is regarding AI. I think you mentioned it. That could be used to propose like new things for funding, etc. Do you think that it could be biased regarding what projects could found or what different things it could recommend?
Yeah, so AI in general is only as good as the thing that you're optimizing it for, right? And so the approach that I generally favor is what I call AI as the engine and like high quality human governance as the steering wheel, right? And so in the info finance example, for example, the way that this works is that you have a human mechanism that's making a small number of decisions, and then you have an open market. Anyone can submit AIs that try to decide on every question, and those AIs get scored by how well they align with the human jury on those specific questions that get randomly selected, right? And so for the people creating the AIs, their incentive is to try to do as good a job as possible at replicating the decisions that that human group would make, but at this obviously be like much more efficient and much more scalable, right? And so then obviously you still have the problem of like actually designing that human governance and making sure that it's good and has the values that you want, right? But it makes the problem simpler because you have one piece that provides the direction and then another piece that tries to scale it.
Cool, thanks.
Hello, Vitalik. I have a lot of questions, but I already did one the other day, so I will ask other. It's related of what kind of research lines in the scientific community related to blockchain or related to cryptography are important and you think are great in order to dive into to create in the future better products or more security or more,
Yeah, so what kinds of cryptographic technologies are really important to work on right now?
Yeah, research, yeah.
Okay, so one is use cases of zero-knowledge proofs, right? So I think one of those is zero-knowledge proofs for privacy. And I think we've gotten to the point where zero-knowledge proofs to prove that you're a member of a set, like just basic Merkle branches, are pretty well optimized. But the thing that we need, I think, is to be able to locally prove a general purpose VM, right? So that users would be able to prove arbitrary, more complicated statements about private data that they have without revealing that data. So that's one piece. Another piece is zero knowledge wrappers of Web2 trust, forms of identification. So and this is useful, I think, for like accounts, right? So I talk a lot about ZK email, for example, which is like, basically what it is you can generate an Ethereum address that is a smart contract where you can only send transactions from that address if you provide a zero-knowledge proof that you control a particular email account, right? And you can create these kinds of like wrappers of Web2 trust for anything, right? So for social media accounts, for government ID. So this has been done, for example, the Anon-Adhar people in India have done this for their government ID. It has been done for passports of many countries. It's been done for in the Mina card in Japan. Actually, many types of government ID. So that's also valuable. Then also ZK for scaling. I think we just have to like keep on pushing forward to the point where we can prove things hopefully with like less than 10x overhead. And I think we should be able to get there. I think the idea is that we need to just develop very good specialized modules for the parts of computation that are the most expensive. So basically hash functions. And also signatures and other parts of cryptography. So that's for ZK snarks. Then other frontiers are, so one is like a fully homomorphic encryption, and together with that, multi-party computation, also two-party computation. And that technology has like finally gotten to the point where it's efficient enough that you can do computation on other people's private data. And like I've seen actual applications that do this, right? So one of the things that was demoed in Thailand about a month back is like a set intersection app, right? Basically something where you list what your interests are, another person lists what their interests are, and then you can figure out like what are your common interests without revealing anything else, right? So applications like this already can be done, and there is also blockchain use cases for this. Then going into the further future, so obfuscation. So this is a way to encrypt a program in such a way that you can still run the encrypted program, it does the same thing, but you cannot see what's inside the program. If you have obfuscation, you can actually do like almost everything else using obfuscation. But obfuscation is like extremely difficult to do. We have algorithms for it, but the estimate right now is like they take about 1 year to run, right? So it's like very early stage, a lot of optimization to do. So a lot of hard work can be put in there. Another area is making everything that we already have quantum resistant, right? So quantum computers are coming, and quantum computers will make any elliptic curve cryptography not work anymore. And so everything that's elliptic curve based has to switch over and basically be either hash based or lattice based. So fortunately, snarks or starks are hash based, and we know how to do those. Fortunately, fully homomorphic encryption is lattice based. We know how to do that. For obfuscation, there are ideas for how to do it with just lattices as well. So a lot of like really good work there, but like that stuff really still needs to be improved and optimized. So if there's anyone who is a researcher in these areas, I mean, if you're building in the application area, I mean, I see the Zama people here, like eagerly bouncing their head 100 times. So I'm sure they're good people to talk to. For core protocol stuff, Justin Drake from the Ethereum team, he's been leading like long-term Ethereum roadmap questions, and so he is a great person to talk to as well. Yeah, it's very important stuff.
Hi, Vitalik. I have a question regarding your first slide that was about payments, and more specifically local payments in countries, non-rich countries, like you said, that where infrastructure is either super expensive or slow. There seems to be a case for having countries such as Argentina and Venezuela or any place where there's high inflation to use crypto as a way of paying for coffee. And I've done a bunch of experiments in the space, and I know that you were super happy a couple of years ago being able to pay with a custodial solution at a local merchant. And it seems that the merchants are super happy to adopt crypto as a mean of payments, but it looks like nobody was able to crack how to get users to adopt it and switch from credit cards or cash or their local payment rails into crypto. And I was wondering if, for your work in demo, you have any insights as to what can get like users into this new habit?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think like in general, it's very hard for new forms of payments to be adopted in general, right? If you saw like just how many years it's taken for like digital payments to become dominant over cash, like it's taken a long time, and I mean, the easiest answer, unfortunately, is like when the centralized forms of payment stop working. I think if you don't have, if you don't get something like that happening, then I mean, like you have to give the user some particular reason to use the new form of payment that doesn't like exist for the existing form of payment, right? And so one thing that sometimes happens like is giving discounts sometimes actually works, right? Like often the reason why merchants are like eager to adopt it is because the way that these credit card companies have structured it is like all of the fees go onto the merchants, right? And like 3%, whatever the higher percents are, like, and it's like often half of their profit margin, like the merchants all pay that and the consumer doesn't see, right? And so like just, merchants giving like the consumer like some level of some discount is like something that like possibly can work. And the other approach is just like you starting with either internet payments or like other kinds of things to just encourage more people to download the application, and then like hopefully it'll have less friction and people will have it already. Another thing is just like improving the raw user experience, right? So like one of my personal user experiences as someone paying with crypto is like there's just a lot of opportunities for things to break, right? So like for example, sometimes your internet breaks, right? And I think what you want, like the nice thing about credit cards is that as long as the merchant's internet works, it works, right? And so what you can do is you can make a wallet where only the merchant needs to be online, right? The way this works is you can use either NFC or a QR code, and then it's like actually the consumer shows the QR code to the merchant, right? So you make it backwards. And like basically, yeah, the more like you make things like that available, and then the more you can actually make the experience frictionless, even in the edge cases, like even when one or two or three of the assumptions that you're relying on all break at the same time. Like that's something that I also notice, right? Like for myself as a user, the times that I notice myself giving up on things are when like one or two things break and there's just no way around it, and then you just go back to the old thing, right? So I feel like it's a combination of all of those.
Hi, Vitálik.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
Mm-hmm.
I am Luciano from Prutopia. And my question is about non-financial applications. It's how do you imagine an on-chain work profile, or which concept, which things do you think that a non-chain work profile should be or must-haves?
What kind of on-chain profile?
On-chain work profile.
Warp profile?
Work profile, yes. Job profile, sorry.
Oh, work.
On-chain resume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, the most natural thing is just like what your work and education history is, right? And just making that information like really accessible in a standardized format, right? And so we've seen, like there's proof of attendance, we've seen things like like zoo stamps, Ethereum attestation protocol. Like there's a lot of like basic ways to make those attestations, but that information just needs to become more accessible. And like I think probably you need to just go do the legwork and get some actual adoption, right? So like look at major education providers, major employers, major gig work providers, like software people, and like try to actually get people to like plug into that system and provide that information, right? Like sometimes like just having that network effect existing is often the bottleneck.
Hi, Vitalik.
Hi.
Joaquin here from On the Rocks. My question is related, it's government related. You talked about the possibility of basically unlocking direct democracy with the chain. In an extreme, it could make kind of Congress useless in some way. But what do you think would be an innovation in that sense, and how do you think you can help bridge the gap between that and what politicians or policymakers aim to do and their goals, their personal goals?
Yeah, and so I think, there's a lot of different ways to start doing this, right? But generally, what I think he wants to do is he wants to like carve out some kind of sandbox and like some domain where you can actually start really doing these things at either a local level or within one specific industry, right? So this could be one region of Buenos Aires. This could be like, for example, funding public media is like something a lot of people care about, right? Because there's good reasons to be scared of the government controlling the media. There's also good reasons to be scared of billionaires controlling the media, and like creating a third alternative to both of those is important. So come up with figure out some region like that, and then figure out some governance mechanism that is very participatory, that actually makes sense in that particular context, right? So for news media, quadratic funding has been suggested before. I mean, retro funding could also work. Deep funding I think is also worth considering, right? But basically, figure out some particular mechanism and then deploy it. And I think in general, to the average politician, it's difficult to convince them of something just by giving them a theory. It's easy to convince them of something by giving them a live example, right? Because if you give them a live example, then they see that it works, and they also see that your ask to them is not to do some complicated thing they have to spend a month wrapping their head around. Your ask to them is, we have the software, we know how to do it, please sign on the dotted line so we can do it here too, right? And that kind of ask is much more reasonable to a politician that is, in theory, sympathetic to what you're trying to do. So that's the kind of approach that I think makes sense. And I think designing the right mechanism is very important, right? Direct democracy, historically, it has problems, right? The biggest problem is the fact that you're not going to get a quality answer if each person is only providing a very small level of attention, right? And basically you get an answer that's just dominated by not very well thought through biases that are actually common among those people, and the ability to have very sophisticated opinions come through doesn't actually come out, right? And there are ideas for mechanisms, so sortition is an example that could try to get past that kind of issue. And these are the kinds of things that you want to really spend a lot of time really thinking deeply through. But basically, find the use case, come up with the right mechanism that would actually do a good job of getting diverse feedback and high quality feedback, and then actually implement it and go from there.
Hey Vitálik.
Yeah.
So here Alexo, co-founder of Bondi Finance. So I was really happy to see bonds on your second slide as we tokenize corporate bonds. Now my question. So I believe you are happy with the layer 2 scaling of Ethereum. I just wanted to ask. There is a lot of people in the community who's wondering will mainnet ever be again be able to use by the retail users? What do you think about layer 1 scaling of Ethereum?
Yeah, and I think the question that we want to ask, right, is you want to go one step further, and you want to ask what do you actually want out of layer 1 scaling as opposed to layer 2 scaling, right? And I think there are actual answers, but it's good to go through what those actual answers are, right? So sometimes the answer is better standards and better interoperability, something that just actually feels like one ecosystem instead of feeling oh, I have to make 50 decisions, and then if I make the wrong decision, I'm incompatible with both of my user base, and then moving coins around is difficult. And those are problems that actually can be solved. Another possible answer is synchronous composability, right? You want to have applications that are in the same place so that you can make one transaction that does things between all 5 applications, right? And there are shared sequencing ideas that can make a difference there, though I think that also is an argument to either increase the gas limit of the layer 1 or potentially create a different idea is native layer 2s. So layer 2s that are actually part of the protocol, or at least layer 2s that are basic designs to be as interoperable with layer 1 as possible, and that are designed by a team that is actually just an Ethereum team instead of being Ethereum and also having some other interest of their own, right? So Nethermind Surge is, I think, one good example of this. A third reason why you might want layer 1 scaling is because you're worried about value capture, right? You're worried about ETH the asset as basically the argument is if the actors that are in front of users' faces are actors that are not well aligned with ETH, then like they're not going to put ETH in front of people. They're going to put their own tokens, and then like ETH will just slowly become forgotten, and it'll keep on going down, even if Ethereum as an ecosystem succeeds, right? And like that's like I think that's something that we don't want, because I mean, at the very least, like if ETH goes down, that'll be very bad for all of the entities that are actually like building all of the research and software that's actually important for the for the whole ecosystem to thrive, right? So if we want to solve that problem, increasing layer 1 scaling gas limit is one option. Another option is actually the exact same native rollup idea, right? Like native rollups are like almost very similar to layer 1 in a lot of ways, right? And the value capture can go to ETH. The branding is ETH. They can be designed to be very interoperable. The difference is basically like composability versus the decentralization gains of having something that's more asynchronous, right? And so like there's a technical challenge there, right? Like if you just say, okay, we're going to have one rollup and that one rollup has 10,000 TPS, then like block production of that rollup is going to end up being very centralized, right? But then if you try to make something that solves that problem, then like you also risk losing composability, right? So there's a balance there. So yeah, and I think there's so just increasing the gas limit is good, and I think there are other things that have to happen at the same time, right? So like for example, EIP 7623, which will reduce the maximum call data size, and so they'll prevent occasional extremely large blocks from like DOSing the network. That one's important. Making the EVM more efficient, continue multi-dimensional gas. Like there's a combination of EVM improvements that can make, I would say potentially like 5 to 10x L1 gas limit actually like viable and safe. And so I think those things are good to work on. But then at the same time, I think like layer 2 strategies are also important. And so I think like we'll see a combination of these different techniques. I think people are actually working on all of them in parallel already.
Do you have like 2-3 more hours for the question? Well, we need to wrap up in a while, so we'll have 2 more questions, and that's it. So,
hello, I'm Alexei, co-founder of Innerly. In terms of improving user experience, do you believe we can see, with internet, Ethereum with monthly end user subscription without commission in future, just like internet?
You mean like without transaction fees?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the problem that I see with that approach, right, is that it basically, like it removes basically if you remove like the market control on how much people can use the network, you have to have some kind of like more opaque and more illegible like centralized or political control, right? So like this often happens with internet services where they offer like theoretically unlimited data, but then if you use too much data or if you use the wrong kind of application, like then they start throttling you and they start like or they start banning you, right? And like that actually creates like a much less open and free system, and one that's like more like a lot more illegible. And it creates one where like the enforcement has to be much more centralized, right? So that's the risk that I see. I think I mean if we want to like solve the underlying problem of improving user experience, I think the 2 things that we want to do, I mean, one is just improving scaling, right? So we've already seen transaction fees reduce from like $5 to like less than 1 cent, and then those fee reductions, they themselves enable improvements in user experience, right? So for example, Farcaster, right? Ethereum-based decentralized social media. One of the things that it does is the main app, Warpcast. As a user, if you just sign up for the first time, the application pays the fees for you, right? So you don't have to have crypto tokens just to sign up. That's a UX improvement that's only possible because transaction fees actually have gotten cheap enough that they can afford it, right? Another example is instead of like actually seeing the gas fee like every time you pay for a transaction, like you should be able to pay for gas like 10 cents or 25 cents at a time, right? And like this is, if you think about like actual gas, right? And like actual gasoline in a car, right? Like technically you are paying every time you turn your car, right? Every time you hit accelerate, every time you turn left, every time you turn right, you are paying, right? But nobody really cares and nobody really pays attention. And I think that's for two reasons, right? One is like it's hidden in the user interface. And two is that it's cheap enough that nobody feels the need to try to think harder about it, right? And so I think if you have those two criteria, then the inconvenience of actually seeing the gas fee and like worrying about whether or not you want to pay for a particular transaction, like that will stop being an issue. The concern that you want to avoid with like any kind of scheme that involves paying things on behalf of your user is basically, are people going to abuse it, right? Like if you give someone even one free transaction, what are they going to do? Let's say your normal transaction fee is $1, right? Here's what you can do. What you can do is you can go on Uniswap and you can identify an arbitrage opportunity that gives you 99 cents of profit. Now, that arbitrage opportunity exists. Why? Because nobody's going to claim it. Nobody's going to claim it because in order to claim it, you have to pay $1 in transaction fees. And so if you have your free transaction, then someone will just make a dApp where you can go and you can make this Uniswap arbitrage, and then you get the 99 cents. And somebody else, whoever offered you the free transaction, they're going to pay the $1, right? And then like you have to start having complicated centralized infrastructure just to try to like ban people who try to abuse the system in that way. And then you have censorship, you have centralization, and then like all of the benefits of the blockchain start going away, right? So like that's how you see like the danger of some of the more naive ways of solving the problem. And I think, yeah, the good way to solve the problem is to just have fees be cheap enough that users don't have to care, and then just don't show fees to people in the same way that a driver doesn't actually see like how many milliliters of gas they're spending every time they accelerate in their car.
Hi, here is
yes.
Olo from Palab.
Okay.
As soon as the industry goes to tokenization of real world assets, you need more and more oracles. And today, the way that we can structure a solution with Oracle is neither good in performance, neither in cost. Any plans to develop any kind of methods that help us to orchestrate in a better way, than a more cost-effective ways, Chainlink or other providers of oracles in order to reduce costs and improve performance?
So you're saying reduce cost and improve performance for which use case?
For example, Chainlink, or how we can orchestrate and try to improve the performance and the cost-effective when we use oracles. Today, use oracles very expensive.
Yes. Okay, so a couple of things, right? So one huge inefficiency that exists right now is like Chainlink is publishing to L1 and to multiple L2s at the same time, right? Like that's inefficient and needlessly inefficient. The correct solution is that Chainlink can submit to L1, and then L2s should be able to read the L1, right? So there's like precompiles like L1 SL and L1 static call. Some L2s have them implemented, other L2s should implement them. And I think if they do implement them, then like you don't have to deal with this double cost problem. So that's one. And then the other approach that is also worth building is like poll-based oracles, right? So instead of the oracle always pushing to chain, basically the user has to ask the oracle to provide an answer, a signed answer, and then the user has to pull that answer into the chain in order to use it, right? So I think both of those approaches are worth doing, and like that can like basically solve the inefficiencies that we have right now.
Well, last question here.
Okay.
Hey, how are you? So one of the promises of crypto has always been like hacking the financial system, providing more opportunity to people in the form of access to wealth, for example. But in the end, what ends up happening is that we end up replicating the same structure of like the regular world, right? So a few percentage of the people ends up owning most of the wealth. So I wanted to know, like, what are your thoughts on crypto as a wealth distribution system, and how can we get better at that?
Yeah, and I think it's important to like keep in mind, right, that like crypto cannot solve every problem, right? And I think so with the wealth concentration thing, the way that I think about it is like Actually, I have this blog post from about 3 years ago where I basically criticized the Gini coefficient, right? And like I basically point out that the wealth inequality problem is actually two separate problems, right? One problem is when people are needlessly suffering because they have zero or because they have very little, right? Like someone like literally doesn't have like $1 or doesn't have like very basic access. And the second problem is concentration of power at the top, right? And like those are very different problems, right? Like you could imagine a country that like where all of the power is held by one dictator, but then everyone aside from the dictator is perfectly equal, right? And then on the flip side, you could imagine a country where power is like very widely distributed, but there's like one minority that everyone hates and discriminates against, and like they just get blocked out of everything, right? So like those are separate problems. So I think crypto can address both of those problems, but not perfectly. And the way that it addresses them, I think, is like different, right? So if you think about the problem of like wealth inequality at the bottom, I think the thing that the place where crypto is most effective, realistically, is like addressing inequality between countries, right? And like generally, when people talk about inequality, they talk about inequality inside of single countries, right? And the reason why they talk about this is because that discourse, the usual goal of the discourse is to like try to affect economic policy and try to affect tax policy, and so it's always in the context of, you know, in America or in Europe or in Argentina. But like the reality is that 2/3 of global inequality is between countries, not within countries, right? And so like I think crypto is playing that valuable role in just improving access. And like that's, it is something where like actually measuring that level of impact is it's very difficult to measure, right? Because there's like complicated knock-on effects, there's like very indirect ways in which people having access to finance ends up leading to prosperity and so on, right? So that's that's like inequality at the bottom. For inequality at the top, I think so like money is like one type of inequality. There's also political power as inequality, right? Like I think the percent of the world that is democracies has been declining for the last 20 years. We're in an era of very powerful dictators. Also, and then the people that, like the specific wealthiest people that people tend to be concerned about, they're not just like people who are kind of off, like peacefully enjoying $5 billion and like having a big boat, right? They're people who are like actually controlling major companies, having like very huge undemocratic influence over like entire countries' political systems, right? And I think with crypto, the thing that it does there is not so much having an impact on like the wealth distribution, right? Because like on the one hand, yes, it gives power to a new group of people, but on the other hand, you have like people, like CZ and like Brian Armstrong, like all the leaders of major exchanges, like their net worth goes up to billions of dollars, and then Satoshi, like probably low hundreds of billions of dollars and so on, right? So the place where crypto like makes an impact is reducing the power of monopolies, right? So creating alternatives to centralized monopolies, and in particular, like their ability to actually have like control over an entire economy and be able to block out alternatives, right? And so like that's like that kind of power democratization is valuable, and I think crypto does that, and I think that does like contribute to wealth democratization to some extent, but it's also like valuable even beyond the wealth democratization part as well.
Well, folks, we have to wrap up.
Yes.
Vitálik, was
Thank you.
Really a pleasure. Was a pleasure.